Today's video is sponsored by Skillshare. Skillshare is an online learning community with thousands of different classes for creatives. And the first 1,000 who click the link in my description will get a free trial of Skillshare Premium. Hello there and welcome to the first BoBeats video of the new year. And today we're checking out the Solar 50. It's a big ambient dream machine with 50 oscillators. You heard that right? 10 voices, 50 oscillators. It's built like a tank and it's a bit of a hate-love relationship because I truly love what I can get out of it, but I kind of dislike how long it takes me sometimes to tune all of these 50 oscillators. More about that later in today's video. We're gonna explore this, gonna listen to some demos. I've been really trying to make it my own and use it in a way that makes sense to me. So a lot of ambient drone noises coming up. Put on some great headphones and let's go. So let's start with a bit of an overview, and the name kind of says it all. It's a big ambient machine. It's definitely geared towards more drone type music, kind of experimental, for a lack of a better word. So what we have here are 10 identical voices. So it's a 10 voice synthesizer. You control them using these touch strips here. Each of the voices have 5 oscillators. You control the pitch using these knobs here. And that totals 50 oscillators that you have to tune manually. Now, do you need 50 oscillators? For most use cases, maybe not, but it can be really, really cool. And I hope to show you some cool examples of this. But it's also the synthesizer's biggest weakness. You have to tune 50 oscillators manually, and they do kind of detune after a while. So you have to fiddle with them quite a bit to get it right. Sometimes when you leave it on, it does detune a bit. So if you can't see yourself sitting here tuning oscillators, getting it right, getting it to where you want to, if you can't see yourself doing this, it's not the synth for you. If you feel like you have the patience for it, which I personally do, can be very rewarding. So on the voices, we have a hold button here, so you can create a drone very easily. And there's also attack and release, which is quite musical actually. Or with a snappy attack and no release. Beside having individual control of the different pitches of the different oscillators, we also have a main pitch control, and this can be quite useful when you want to change the tuning without going in and changing the individual tuning of the oscillators, for example like this. Now there's no markings for the tuning like semitones or anything like that, so you have to go by ear. But I think for like drone type stuff, you know, it could be useful. On the voices, we can also push these buttons here, which lets you modulate the pitch of the oscillators, either using the CV mod input here, you can attenuate the signal here, or using this light sensitive controller here. And we also have a gate input, so you can trigger the individual voices using, say, a BeatStep Pro or similar. I think Nick Batt did a really good job at showing this in his review of the Solar 50, so if you haven't checked it out, go and watch that. It also has two LFOs, they are identical with rate and variable waveforms. Outputs over here, quite useful. We also have a filter, 12 dB, I think it's from the Polyvox synthesizer. And then we have cutoff here, resonance. There's effects section that we'll touch on later. There's headphones outputs, and there's a main mixer here. And then there's control for the external input, which works with the microphone or guitar or line level even. And then there's the piezo pickup that we have here. And then we have the voice mixer with individual control for all the 10 voices, which is super handy and very useful when you do like big drone type stuff. You can live mix between the voices. So that's kind of nice. And beside having control of the individual voices here on the keyboard, we also have these marked T, and they're outputted here, send voltages, so you can use them to trigger stuff. Now there's basically two different ways of using the Solar 50. One is using the wet output that takes the signal through the filter, through the effect section, into a mono output here. And that's nice, but I think that the best way of using it is using the left and right outputs, and that gives you a much wider stereo sound, basically splitting the 10 voices left and right. This lets you create a really big and beefy drone type sound. And then you can process the dry signal through, say, an external effects unit. I used the Blackhole from Eventide previously. Now this creates kind of a weird situation where I prefer to use the left and right dry output over using the mono wet output. Basically, I'm not using the filter and the effects as much as I could be if they were in stereo. And I feel like using the left and right output is more in line with the philosophy of the unit, basically having these wide soundscape, massive drones, and then processing them outside of the Solar 50. But it does create this weird situation where I'm not taking advantage of the filter and effects section, because it's mono. So here's another thing you can do. You can take the left output here, basically taking these voices here and outputting them through some external effects. And then you take the wet output, and you take these voices, these 5 voices here, and use the wet output, giving you control over the filter. So while oscillators all share the same waveform, you can actually frequency modulate. So if we push the pitch knob here past 12 o'clock, the oscillator starts to cross modulate. It doesn't offer a ton of variation in terms of sound, but it's kind of nice though to have it just to kind of spice up your drones. Another way of using the Solar 50 is using the wet output or the main output. This is a mono output that lets the voices go through the filter and the effects section. And because we're using a mono output, the sound is of course not as big as when we're using the left-right outputs, but we do get the filter and the effects, and it can sound something like this. And if we push the filter here, we can get some really gnarly tones. If I increase the resonance all the way, I'm not gonna increase the cutoff all the way because it's kind of hurtful for your ears, but and at 20 minutes past, I think it's the nicest spot for the filter. Next up, we have the effects section. I think it's actually really cool. So we have these small cartridges, kind of reminiscent of, yeah, I don't know, an old video game or something. So basically just pluck one out and insert another one. And you press this little reset button here, and then it loads. And then you have blend. You also have 3 parameters that you can control with CV. And yeah, it's mono, but there are a couple of really good ones. So for example, this one here is called Pitch Shifter. So we're gonna listen to that one. And when you buy the Solar 50, you get a couple of these effects cartridges, and I think you can buy more. Though I will say that the fact that there's a mono output, and I'll probably state this again, does limit its usefulness in some cases. For some effects, it doesn't matter all that much if it's a filter or if it's some kind of bit reduction or digitalization of the sound. You know, it doesn't matter all that much. But when it comes to like big reverbs and stuff, it's kind of a bummer that it's a mono output. But having the effects on these small cartridges is kind of a cool idea. It feels kind of fun, different at least. What you saw me do there was using these light sensitive controllers, I guess you could call them, to control the pitch of 2 of the oscillators. Now the effect itself can be quite subtle and depends a little bit on how you have tuned the oscillators, but if you listen here. You can actually enable or disable this modulation by using these buttons here. So switching on and off for each of the oscillators here. So we could just be modulating one of the 5 oscillators if we want to using this light sensitive controller. Now this is kind of nice, and it's nice that it is subtle because you might not want these big sweeps. If you want more radical pitch changes, use the CV mod input over here. There's no tracking here, so you can't control the pitch of the oscillators in any way, really, besides tuning them manually. And that's something that I'd love to see in a version 2 or Mark II version of the synthesizer, having, say, volt per octave to control the pitches of the oscillators, making them much more usable in contemporary music. Now, of course, this is the big ambient machine. We have to keep that in mind. It's kind of a no-compromise drone machine at the end of the day. It's not necessarily meant for more traditional Western styles of music, but it would have been a cool addition for a Mark II anyway. So today's video is sponsored by Skillshare, and they have a really cool class for you, how to compose ambient music. It was actually recommended to me by a viewer who seemed to like it a lot. Another class that I've recommended before is Learn How to Mix Music with Young Guru. I think it's an excellent course, I enjoyed it a lot, and I think especially if you're a beginner starting out, it could be a really good starting point for your music production journey. And Skillshare is not just for creatives, it's for the entire family. So for example, if you want to learn about productivity, there is a good course on that for you on Skillshare. If you want to learn about photo, video editing, you name it, Skillshare got courses for you. What's really good about Skillshare is that the classes are curated specifically for learning, meaning that there's no ads, and there's always new premium classes coming, and it's less than $10 a month with an annual subscription. So lastly in the video, let's talk about if this synthesizer is for you. And firstly, I think it's very important that you ask yourself if you have the patience to tune all of these oscillators, because if you don't, it's just not for you. And you also have to ask yourself if you're okay with the oscillators detuning after a little while, and sometimes you have to go back and retune them. That's another thing you have to consider. Secondly, of course, do you enjoy the kind of big soundscapes that it can produce? Is that something that you're looking for in your music? For some styles of music, drone-based music, I think that this fits extremely well. And for more general electronic music, I think that it can work as kind of sample fodder. I personally sampled it into Machina. I made a track with it. It might not be ready for this video here. I might put it up on Patreon or something because my kids haven't been sleeping for a couple of days. And long story short, didn't have energy or time to produce that for you today. But I have done it. Works really well. I think it's a very interesting way of using it as kind of sample fodder. So that's another approach you could take. And to reiterate a previous point of mine, I do think it's a bad design decision to have a mono effects output. I think that that kind of defeats the purpose of the effects section a little bit. Do keep in mind that some of the effects, like for example, this one here, it's called filter, adds a filter. So basically you have two filters. That one works really well in mono. That's not really an issue. The problem I'm having is that the basic idea of the synth is to have these wide soundscapes. And when you're using it with the filter and when with the effect here, it becomes mono and becomes, tighter, smaller, it doesn't have this width. But at the end of the day, a stereo effects output would have, made it a lot better in my opinion. So at the end of the day, this is a very no compromise synthesizer. It is what the maker intended it to be, for better or for worse. It's not a mass market synth, it's not for everyone, but it might be for a small portion of you watching this. And if it is, I have a little link to Elta Music, not affiliated, don't get anything if you click it, but if you want to go and check it out, that's cool. Support these small manufacturers, I think that's always great. And of course, if you enjoyed today's video, hit the thumbs up and subscribe to the channel. I have a lot more cool content coming in 2021. And be sure to check out today's sponsor as well, Skillshare. So talk to you later and have a great day.